Good afternoon and welcome to our second day of our You Will conference. My name is Kenny Yarbrough and I serve as the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer here at UW-Whitewater. We are elated that you are joining us for our session, Disability Workplace Engagement. And we are joined today by William Tipper Thomas III as our clinician. Before we go into our session, I do want to give you a little background about our speaker on today. May the 7th, 2004 was a day William Joseph Thomas' life changed completely. He was an innocent bystander in a shooting incident that took place in Baltimore, Maryland. As a result, the one-time three-sport athlete was left paralyzed from injuries sustained at the shooting. Some would describe him as a victim. Today, William J. Thomas, affectionately known to many as Tipper, can no longer be described as a victim. William is an advocate, an engineer, a servant leader, a survivor, and most importantly, resilient. He is an active member and a community servant. William founded the William Tipper Thomas Foundation, which is an organization that facilitates programming to improve urban community health issues, including mental health, trauma-informed care, race relations, violence prevention programs, and to promote STEM education. He is also an advocate for people who live with disabilities. He has been featured on panels and keynote events with several prominent and professional athletes from the NBA, WNBA, NFL, as well as public celebrities. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you William Tipper Thomas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Yarbrough, once again for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure getting the opportunity to work with you, per usual. Good afternoon, students, staff, and corporate partners. Thank you for attending this afternoon's breakout session, talking about the disability workforce engagement and some of the things that I've learned and seen throughout my early career as an engineer professional working for the Department of Defense. First slide we have is a quick agenda. Talk about some disability employment myths and stereotypes. I'm going to counter that with disability facts and truths. Suggest 3 changes that you can make to your corporate environment to be more inclusive for people with disabilities. How these changes will make a difference. I'm going to share with you more of my personal experiences. And I'm going to talk about disability today and give some hopes of what I hope disability will look like tomorrow and in the future. And then we have time left, and if there are any, we'll open up for some question and answer period. So first, what are disability myths and stereotypes that I've seen and heard throughout the years? That qualified workers with disabilities are hard to find. Employees with disabilities are less productive as their able-bodied peers. They have poor attendance. You can't hold people with disabilities to the same performance standards as their counterparts. Accommodations for people with disabilities are costly. And people with disabilities are looking for a handout, special programs, et cetera, et cetera. None of these can be further from the truth. Disability job agencies have identified talent that are willing and able and ready to work if given the opportunity and it's a fit for what they're able to do. Performance of people with disabilities is even to or better than their able-bodied peers. As I shared earlier when I was giving my personal story and how my disability allows me a certain experience or a certain perspective when it comes to performing my job tasks. I guarantee you, I take my job and I go at my job a whole lot harder than my able-bodied peers do because of what my experience is as someone who was once able-bodied who became a person with a disability. 80% of accommodations for people with disabilities cost less than $500. Whether it's software, or text-to-read software, or their Braille accommodations for people who are vision and blind impaired, changing the desk heights for people with wheelchairs to be able to fit comfortably under a desk. All of those accommodations, less than $500. People with disabilities are very punctual and reliable. People with disabilities want to work and earn a sense of independence. One of the first things that was expressed to me when I was told that I was going to be a person with a disability for the foreseeable future of my life was that I needed to, if I wanted to go to school, I needed to take on a major that would allow me financial independence to take care of myself independently. These two options were at hand if I wanted to be able to pay for my injury. And that was to either be a doctor or become an engineer. So that was one of the first decisions I had to make when it came to wrestling with being a person with an disability, with a disability. How was I going to regain my independence? Three changes that you can make to your culture to make things more inclusive for people with disabilities. You can adhere to compliance standards. You know, you have the American Disabilities Act of 1990, which requires companies to not discriminate against employment of people with disabilities, gives guidance to the accommodation process, to the recruitment process, details advancement opportunities. It also created changes in buildings, theaters, sports venues, public spaces were made accessible by the American Disability Act of 1990. It also allowed for children with disabilities to get free, accessible education. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 enforces affirmative action plans and sets federal contractor regulations. That these regulations pretty much give incentives for companies to hire people with disabilities to create a diverse workforce. Section 504 is a civil rights law, protects individuals with disabilities from discrimination for reasons related to their disability, forbids organizations and employers from excluding or denying individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to receive program benefits and services. So trying to align your organization structure and compliance to these three government legislations will help along the process of making a diverse workforce and having people engaged as such. You also want to include inclusion by creating employee resource groups. At my company, we have an organization called Voice, and it's basically employee resource groups that is mainly comprised of people with disabilities. We voice our concerns with facilities. We put together different activities and events throughout the year that sort of kind of bring awareness to different disability issues. I mean, we did an event called What It's Like to Be in Our Shoes. So we had middle management, upper management, vice principals and directors for a couple hours out of their day adapt or simulate having a disability. And so it gave them opportunity to see how much their life would change in just a short period of time and just one aspect of their life being work life. We had one director wear sunglasses or opaque sunglasses to pretty much simulate being blind. We had another vice president, negotiate his day in a wheelchair. We had another vice president stuff cotton in his ear to reduce the amount of hearing that he had for the day. And the feedback that we always get, especially from that particular exercise, is always eye-opening to the decision makers on what it's like to be in our shoes and the challenges that we have to overcome, and how much incorporating such accommodations makes life easier for everyone, especially for people with disabilities. And also with that example, we also advocating for people in the middle management, upper management ranks to have representation there. It's a much more believable thing when a company says they believe in diversity and inclusion when the employees or the customer sees that the middle and upper management ranks are diverse. And although I know a lot of companies have representation for people who have hidden disabilities, I think that's an even bigger boon if you have representation at those ranks for people who have physical and visible disabilities. People with disabilities buy into the company disability initiatives more when there's evidence that someone that is there that is sensitive to their perspective and is in a room when the company is making decisions about how to move forward. Also, it gives people with disabilities, employees with disabilities, an opportunity to see that there is growth for me at this company. That if I wanted to aspire to be a director or vice president or a company CEO, that hey, there's someone that's already done it before, so their path is attainable for me. Questions to ask your employer, ask yourself as employers are, can people with disabilities get into your selling or workspace? Can anyone with a disability navigate your webpage? I'll speak more about webpage accessibility later on. Make sure your facilities, changes, and upgrades reflect the needs of people with disabilities. Establishing those type of things up front will boom the feeling that the work environment is conducive for people with disabilities. It also creates a strategic advantage, showing upper management there is a business case for hiring people with disabilities. There are low recruitment costs because local community and hiring organizations have already identified people who are qualified, people with disabilities who are qualified to do the work that you're looking for. Disabled employees afford a higher retention rate and are loyal to the company and tend to stay longer in their organization than able-bodied counterparts. And the fact of the matter is, it's flat out good business and good HR practices, as I mentioned before in a question that was asked to me during the keynote. Companies need to be prepared to retain those who are already employed, who might incur a disability over the time or due to a freak accident while living life. Be accessible before there's a need to be accessible. My biggest takeaway for this slide right here. How all of these changes can make a difference. Hiring people with disabilities will make a significant difference in that person's life and in their family's life. As I previously mentioned, there's a big financial burden that comes along with being a caregiver for a person with a disability. Affording them an opportunity to work and earn a self of independence does wonders for that person and for that family. People with disabilities often contend with being a burden on their family. It will be a boon to self-esteem, and it will help alleviate financial difficulties, and it adds to our self-independence. Employment of people with disabilities with access to healthcare through job benefits. The fear of the current health system being abolished has many people with disabilities concerned about their medical needs, how their medical needs will be met. Living in the COVID-19 pandemic is a double-edged sword for people with disabilities. On one hand, the numbers of people with disabilities diagnosed with and dying from the virus is way out of proportion to the general population because of our previously underlying health conditions. On the other hand, employees with disabilities are losing their jobs due to work closures from the pandemic or highly dependent upon technology and are being socially isolated and feel economically insecure. It's sort of a, COVID-19 has sort of been a welcome to my world type of feel for able-bodied individuals, because they're now dependent on a lot of things that people with disabilities have been dependent upon for a long time, the use of technology. Like my wheelchair will be considered technology. Hiring people with disability also gives us a sense of contributing to society as a whole. To counter the previous myths that we want handouts, no, we want to be able to work. We want to be able to provide. We want opportunities to contribute to society. We want to be opportunities to pay taxes. Change legislation does not mean that there's going to be a change in attitude. You can you can legislate many things on people, but you cannot force them to change their attitude about how they view people with disabilities or people who are different than them. Once we change attitudes by normalizing, seeing, and being around people with disabilities, we will see disability as a normal part of the human condition, because as I previously mentioned, it does not take much for an able-bodied person to become a person with a disability. So the more you see it normalized, the more you will see and understand how life can still be lived with a disability. When I do simple tasks that able-bodied people perform all the time, such as drive my car or getting in and out of my car at the grocery store, the gas station, the number of audiences that I've attracted throughout the years, if I had $1 for every time someone stopped and stared at me getting out of my car or performing simple tasks as putting air in my tire or pumping gas or things of that nature, I would probably be 100 millionaire by now. And the vote of confidence I get from strangers who've never seen those things done before by a person with a disability lets me know that the more we normalize these things, the better off society will be, and the better off society will treat people with disabilities, because there's a long-standing history before the ADA was put in the law that people with disabilities were separated from society. Even in school systems, people with disabilities were put at the bottom in the basement of the school, or they were sent off to asylums and hidden from the public. People didn't want to deal with people with disabilities. So the more we normalize seeing people in society with disabilities, the better off it will be. And that's how another way attitudes will change for people who live with disabilities. Also, when I'm at work and I'm performing my tasks just as well as my able-bodied counterparts, it gives a boon of confidence that, hey, William is going to be all right doing his job. I don't have to watch over him. My manager, she literally only checks on me to make sure I'm still alive because I'm so independent in what I do. She said, hey, I haven't heard from you this week. You still alive? Yes, ma'am. I'm just off getting the job done. So she knows she doesn't have to micromanage me. She doesn't have to make sure I have what I need, because I'm going to be my biggest advocate and I'm going to get my job done. And as long as nobody's complaining to her, she leaves me alone to do my job. Having people with a disability, you will see in your workforce, you will see people working who can channel their creativity, who can use problem-solving abilities, and have a tenacity to take things on and navigate a world that was not built for them. Some of my experiences, as I shared earlier during the keynote address, during my undergrad, were because the campus was established in 1867, and most of the buildings that were built before the American Disabilities Act was put into legislation. There were a lot of upgrades that needed to take place to the campus. There were many doors that needed to have the electronic button put on. The school had to understand what accommodations really meant. For me, because I had the physical upper body strength to be able to open doors, a lot of doors weren't an issue for me. However, for someone who was a quadriplegic, meaning they're paralyzed from the neck down, or someone who doesn't have my physical strength, that would be difficult for them to negotiate. So I had them install the electronic button to have the doors open automatically when someone approached. They had to do a lot of maintenance to the elevators in the buildings. I remember as a graduating senior in my graduating semester in Carnegie Hall, which is the math building, it's the oldest building on campus. There is one elevator that goes up and down. There's no main floor in Carnegie Hall. You literally have to take the steps up or down, or take the elevator up and down before you can get to a classroom. And about middle of February of 2011, I was on my way to class, and I had linear algebra on the third floor of this building. I was coming out of class, hit the button, and the elevator turns up broke. I had to call the school police officers to help carry me down 3 flights of steps, and I had to make my way to my 12 o'clock class in the engineering building because I was late for a test that was being administered. That Wednesday, when I returned to Carnegie Hall to go to my 11 o'clock class, my 11 o'clock linear algebra class, there was a big sign on the elevator that said that the elevator was going to be broken. So I called the math department to find out more information about how long this elevator was going to be broken, because it's my sole means of being able to get to my class. I had 2 classes in this building. At my 10 o'clock was probability and statistics, and my 11 o'clock class was linear algebra. 2 classes that I needed to graduate. And the math department told me that the elevator was going to be broken for at least 2 months. So I'm on the phone with them trying to figure out how was I going to be able to get the information I needed to pass my class, because I need this class to graduate. And they told me that I had 2 options. Either I could take 2 I's incompletes and come back in the fall to graduate and finish my class. Well, I said, well, that's not an option, because my mother has already put forth plans for my graduation party, and people already bought plane tickets and things of that nature, so we got to figure something else out. They said, well, we can offer you tutoring sessions to teach you the material, because you won't have access to the classroom. I said, well, at this point, I have no choice but to take the tutoring session. So we organized 2 30-minute sessions a week to cover 3 hours of material per class. So an hour of tutoring to cover 6 hours of material per week for a class named Linear Algebra and Probability Statistics. And because of how the building was situated, I had to do those tutoring sessions in the main hall, in the main lobby, where students were traveling back and forth and doing whatever student activities that they chose to do at the time. So in a busy hallway, I had to come up to speed and learn linear algebra and probability statistics in an hour, and to use an hour to cover 6 hours worth of material for 2 months. Needless to say, I did not get A's in those classes. I got C's in those classes because of the circumstance that I was in, and that was the only viable solution for me in order for me to graduate on time in May. When I was a junior or sophomore, I want to say junior. When I was a junior, I did an internship for a big technology company on the West Coast. I'm not going to mention that company, but it was a big technology company on the West Coast. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. Morgan State is located in Baltimore. This company is on the West Coast. I took the internship opportunity out in Seattle, and I had to do a lot of advanced prep work. I had to figure out how I was going to get back and forth to the location, where all of my local resources would have been at the time, as far as medical supplies, a wheelchair repair company, how I was going to get groceries, how was I going to, in Baltimore, we have MCA Mobility, which is a shuttle service for people with disabilities. It's sort of kind of like a cab, but it's a big shuttle that has a wheelchair lift attached to the back and allows you opportunity to travel throughout the city at a low cost. I had to find out if there was such an experience like this in the area that I was located in. I did not get much assistance from the HR department. The other summer interns were partnered up with everyday engineers who were full-time employees at the company, and they were even allowed opportunities to live with that everyday engineer, with that full-time employee, to one, help them save on room and board, and just so they can know how to govern themselves as professional engineers. However, I was not afforded that opportunity because of my disability. They didn't have any employees who had an accessible home that I could live in. So I was placed in a motel, a long-term stay motel, and I had to pay, I believe it was $700 a week, and I had to provide my own groceries and my own transportation back and forth to work. All of these resources I had to develop once I got out there, once I realized what the situation really was, because no one really explained to me that there was a partnering system that they had for college interns. They did offer me relocation. However, something happened with the relocation package, and I didn't get it in time. So the majority of the money I made on my internship went to room and board. And my experience as being a summer intern working for this company was drastically different. I felt the assignments that they gave me to work on were mediocre tasks. There wasn't nothing challenging about the work that they gave me. I don't know if they didn't think that I had the ability to do more, even though I repeatedly requested for more challenging work. I was never given that opportunity. There was no welcoming ceremony for me. Not that I expected, a red carpet to be rolled out, but I started after the other able-bodied interns did, and my experience overall at that company on that internship was not great. Fortunately for me, I am a part of a fraternity, and I have fraternity brothers and sorority sisters in that area. And on weekends and even at the work, they were my resource. They were the ones who made sure I had what I needed. They were the ones who took care of me. But if I didn't have that personal resource to myself available to me, my experience would have been completely all the way 100% horrible. And once I left that company on my internship, they offered me another opportunity to come back the following summer, but I never took it. And it took about 2 months after my internship was over for me to get the relocation package that was promised to me when I went out there in the first place. So essentially, that was the only money that I really made during my internship, was the relocation package that came after the fact. And still to this day, I don't even buy their products. But you couldn't give me their products for free. I will not take it. I refuse. That's how bad my experience with this company was. People ask me about technology and what should I get for this computer, or what should I get this printer. I will never mention that company's name out my lips. And it's not because their products aren't serviceable or good. It's just that I didn't appreciate how I was treated as a student with a disability at this company. Post-graduation, I was signed up to different disability job agencies or temp agencies that were designed to help people with disabilities get hired and placement for work. Even some government agencies held specialized events for people with disabilities to come and interview and apply for jobs. Every last one of these events that I attended, I felt like were checks in the box for HR, were checks in the box to meet the compliance standards of Section 504 or whatever, the Rehabilitation Act 1973. There was no real evidence that they were really interested in hiring any of us who showed up to interview. Little things such as providing, if you know you're interviewing people who use wheelchairs, please have the space that you're going to interview them in accessible to them. There were no materials provided for the employees who were blind. There were no materials with Braille provided to them for them to be able to read up on the company. There were no signers for people who were deaf or hearing impaired. There was literally no evidence that they really were taking this event serious. To me, it felt like a big PR sham. Like it felt like a huge check in the box. And even if I was offered an opportunity to work with these companies, I wouldn't have taken it just because of how I was treated and how I felt at these different hiring events. Disability today and tomorrow. I've touched a little bit on this already, talking about how there's a stigma associated with people with disabilities. I went over some of the myths and stereotypes previously, but it's a persistent ball and chain. People with disabilities are locked into misperceptions of what we can and cannot do without giving us an opportunity to prove or show what we can and cannot do. Public policy takes a charity or income maintenance approach. We don't expect people to work because people with disabilities to work because their medical conditions deem so. So we provide subsistent level cash benefits and health insurance. And if people go back to work or make over a certain amount, we take away those benefits. It's almost as if I'm being punished for wanting to be a contributing member of society and I have a medical condition or I have a disability. It's almost as if one of the things that the doctors who took care of me at University of Maryland Shock Trauma, when they first suggested to me that becoming a doctoral engineer were going to be the only two majors and that would provide me a decent starting salary to pay for my injury, were that the thing they forgot to mention, or maybe they just didn't know, that because of the starting salary that my degree commands, that I would no longer be eligible for medical disability SSI benefits that paid for a lot of the medical equipment that I was using, that I used in the past while I was an undergrad. In Maryland at the time when I reported that I was working, because I made over $49,000, that I was no longer eligible for medical benefits via SSI and disability. And there was no ramp down period or anything. My benefits were immediately cut off. And since I didn't know how much my medical expenses cost, when it came to having to pay for these things out of pocket, because my job, they offered me insurance, but there's still a certain level of copay that you have to pay in order to get the medical equipment that I need. I was unaware of how much my medical expenses really were until I had to pay for them. And now I'm just now getting to the point in my career now where I'm almost 10 years in to where I can actually afford to pay for my medical expenses. But it took for me 8, 9, 10 years to get to the salary to where I can pay for my medical expenses on my own. And because of the amount of salary that I make, I can't get access to those government programs that will cover medical expenses that your insurance doesn't pay for. There are several side organizations and foundations and grants, et cetera, that people with disabilities who are working people with disabilities can apply for and receive if you make under a certain amount of money. So for whatever reason, it's as if the government thinks, the workforce thinks, mainly the government believes, just because you make a certain amount of money, that you're no longer a person with a disability, and that's completely untrue. Like, I'm an engineer. Most people don't make what engineers make, and I'm just now being able to pay for my disability. It's like we're almost put in a box to where you have to choose between working, making a decent living, having access to benefits and excellent health care, and limiting yourself and how much you can grow at that job because you're worried about having your benefits cut off. If you take what, if you take me as a person with a disability and an able-bodied employee, an able-bodied candidate, you look at our resumes are identical, and you give us both the same starting salary at, let's say, $50,000, $50,000 per, right? The basic able-bodied person's needs are A, B, C, D. That $50,000 will stretch a certain way for that able-bodied person. Whereas me as a person with a disability, my basic needs may be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That $50,000 split is completely different. So, and as a working person with a disability, I'm at a disadvantage because of the amount of the money I make is too much for me to be eligible for government benefits and medical disability, SSI, but I also don't make enough to be able to cover the basic needs that I need to be able to live independently on my own, because I chose to work and because I chose a certain field to go into once I graduated from college. Still today, labor force participation is at only 20% and has remained unchanged since before the ADA was established. No changes in 30 plus years. No changes in disability workforce engagement in 30 plus years. Also a growing concern in the disability in society and how disability is defined is mental health. Poor mental health is a disability. With increases in cases rising due to the pandemic, where economic uncertainty is prevalent, that causes anxiety, depression, and even a form of PTSD for those of us who are not used to being in isolated environments, working from home, or if you are working from home, being home and in the home that you live in can be a traumatic experience depending on the type of household that you have. Tomorrow, Disability Tomorrow, I pray that technology is used to create a level playing field for people with disabilities. In this pandemic, we see technology being used to open the accessibility floodgates. There are things that I've been advocating for at my job because I'm a person with a disability who uses a wheelchair. In the winter months, the cold air stiffens my body up and causes a certain amount of pain on my body that pain relievers don't relieve. But I'm still expected to work. I'm still expected to perform with these type of conditions due to my disability. So every now and then, if the pain gets bad enough, I will request an opportunity to work from home because my stiffness doesn't allow me to get to work and be able to move back and forth in the hallways and get back and forth to meetings and labs and things of that nature that I need to do to perform my job. So I request, a day or two to work from home. However, those are not my usual normal accommodations to be able to work from home because the environment that I work in requires a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration, a lot of back and forth between buildings, and the nature of the field that I work in, aerospace and defense. There are certain capabilities and aspects of the systems that I work on that are classified. So I have to go into certain designated areas to be able to even speak about some of the capability that we're building and designing on the program that I'm working. I can't work on those things from home. So I have to go into the office to be able to work on those things. However, once the pandemic hit, accessibility floodgates open. Now everybody is working from home. I didn't know we had such technology. So now it's like, okay, when I was solely just a person with a disability who was requesting these accommodations, it was okay, we'll give you a day or two, but we expect you to come to work. But now that this pandemic has affected everyone, now we're going to allow this on a more permanent basis that everybody can work from home. And my question is to the job force as a whole is, why did it take for a pandemic to affect everybody for me to get the accommodations that I've been asking for since I started working here? Just some food for thought. Also with technology, there are no applied standards on website accessibility for people who are blind or low vision. This means that there are fewer opportunities for people who are blind or low vision to have access to information. What does this mean in employment? It means blind people or people with low vision don't get access to good work because the availability of information is limited to perform these jobs. The lack of people with disabilities in leadership roles in companies means that there's no way to drive sustainable change in the workforce environment and climate. Change, if it comes, is often short-lived, surviving only as long as the people with the energy to promote them continue to have that energy and continue to be an advocate for themselves and the people that they work with to make change happen. I believe that most companies, HR staff, their EEO offices and equal employment opportunity offices, those are the people who understand what it takes to hire and work with people with disabilities. However, everyday worker bees like myself, I'm just a regular engineer. I don't work with those people on an everyday basis. It's the people that I work with who need to be educated and taught how to work with someone who has a disability. I can't tell you how many rude comments I've had to overlook or act like I didn't hear. So many jokes that have come my way, not necessarily physical jokes, but just people making, snide comments because maybe maybe they're just ignorant, or maybe they just never really had much opportunity to interact with a person with disabilities, so they don't know how to handle that situation. But I do believe there's a certain level of sensitivity training that needs to be given to everyday employees and not just people who work at equal employment offices or the HR personnel. More about technology. People need to realize that when we're building technology, that is literally the power to stunt the growth of entire segments of society. Accessibility is not just a nice to have. It isn't just something that we do to comply to ADA. It has to be something that we really believe in and want to incorporate because, as I previously mentioned, how do you handle employees who are able-bodied, who for whatever reason become a person with a disability? How do you retain them? How do you retain their talent? How do you retain their knowledge? How do you keep them working for you now that they have a disability? By putting these things in place beforehand, being proactive, being innovative, and setting the work environment to make it inclusive for all people who have the ability to perform the work that your job performs. Next 30 years, I hope I won't have to ask for accommodations. I pray that places of employment will have the right physical plant technology and business processes that everyone needs to succeed, not just people with disabilities. Today, I have to ask my employer for accommodations. Tomorrow, I hope the concept of asking for accommodations won't exist because as someone who builds systems, we put in requirements to have certain things in place to design it for best use moving forward. So if you bring people with disabilities to the table when we're designing the future, we can give you inputs on how to create the best environment before you actually go into creating. Because when you're trying, as any design engineer will tell you, the longer you wait to incorporate certain things, the longer you wait and you have to come back and change your design. Changing your design is going to cost you more money versus bringing everyone to the table up front and considering all design options that will save you money on the back end. But if you try to design a place that doesn't include everyone that's expected to work there, any changes and personnel that could happen over the course of a person's lifetime. It will cost you more money to change that design of that workplace, that facility, that environment, than it would if you incorporated and included it in the design conception. Now, I believe that's my last slide. So I'll open it up to questions, Dr. Yarborough, if you have any.
And those that are in the audience, if you would like to pose Tipper a question, please feel free to drop that in the chat. You had a lot of, so you said earlier, I can't remember if it was today or yesterday, you gave us some tips. So today I would say you had some very poignant points. And one of those was you can change legislation, but you can't change people's attitudes. And I think that when you're dealing with any type of equity, diversity, and inclusion work, that's one of the harder things to do, because you can make laws and you can make policies and procedures, but until someone internalizes that into themselves and wants to have an attitude adjustment or attitude shift, it's only going to be what it is on paper. So I really appreciated that. The other thing that you stated that I really resonated with, that there are still some companies who still just want to check the box and to say that we've done this, so obviously that must be that. So I'm curious, going off of your internship, when you had those meager accommodations and you had to do more of the work and advocate for yourself and find your own resources, what would you say to a student who had just graduated from an institution, got their first job, and their company now is one of those that just check the box and they're not being challenged, they're not being fulfilled, you know, like you stated, they're giving that menial work. What would you say to them if they're not happy in that environment?
I would say to them to be their biggest advocate, you know, to voice their concerns. And there are different, and if you have to, there are outside organizations that are available to help you with those concerns. But I would first start with being, you know, voicing your concerns. You can go to HR, you can go to the EEO office, and basically also speak for yourself. Say, hey, you know, I need these things to be able to do my job. Hey, I have the ability to do this and more. I would appreciate the opportunity to do more challenging work. I didn't know these things when I was a junior or sophomore in college. Because as I previously mentioned, I didn't know anyone that was in my situation before I was in my situation, before I became a person with disability. I didn't know anyone who was wheelchair bound that went clear across the country to do an internship by themselves. I had to figure all these things out by myself. But now at this point in my life, I would definitely encourage that person with a disability to be their biggest advocate. And I would also ask HR staff and EEO personnel to make sure that they're thinking about everything they possibly can to help that employee with a disability be able to do their job. Me asking for the tools to do my job is not, you know, asking for anything special that anybody else doesn't have. I still have to get the job done, even if you give me the tools. I still have to have the know-how, the capability to do the job, but it's just easier for me to do my job, and I can be more effective and productive at my job if I have all the accommodations I need to get the job done. But ultimately, it's up to me and my ability and my know-how to do the job. But please be your biggest advocate, because like I said in the session yesterday, nobody knows your disability better than you do. Voice yourself.
And I think that's been one of the concurrent themes that you have tried to communicate in our time together, is for students, and I am looking at it from the vantage point with students. When students are trying to share or go within their own journey of trying to be a professional, leaving whatever their home institution was, you have been trying to get them to be their own biggest advocate, so because they know their disability, to your point, better than anyone else. The other thing that you stated to me that was stated while you were presenting that was so poignant to me was the we
Can
encourage
you hear me?
students to graduate, to go be on their own, to be self-sufficient, but we don't talk about that interim when you graduate at a job that as an entry level position and your benefits then are cut because you have this type of job. And I know that that takes a lot of lobbying on the behalf of our governmental and congressional people so that we can change some of those standards so that those persons can still continue to get the care that they need if they don't have their own personal finances to be able to fund that. So my question is, how do we get students, or not just students, even those who have graduated and are working, but they're caught in that in between, that twixt and in between, where they don't qualify for the benefits that they need to get the services that they need, but they don't make enough money to be able to self-sustain on their own. What would you say to those individuals to be able to mediate that situation? Because that is not an uncommon procedure. That's not uncommon to be heard of. And I go back to my own undergraduate experience when I graduated and being kicked off of my mother's insurance and having to get on my own as a young professional, not making a lot of money and having pre-existing health conditions that required me to have a lot of medical treatment. And yes, that's a big ticket item.
It is, and now that I think about it, like, how did I manage all of these things and having these additional finances levied upon me because I didn't have access to um, disability insurance? I think it helped play a part in me being very financially disciplined, understanding what my needs were and how much they were going to cost. But at the same time, it also did prevent me from being able to advance as soon as I wanted to in life in general. Because for one of the things that is constantly on my mind now is because of the work that I do, I hold a government security clearance. And to have a clearance, the government, they're going to check your credit on a regular basis. And one of the things that is often a concern of mine is an old medical bill from forever ago popping up on my credit report, or having to make sure I pay all of my medical expenses on time so they don't hit my credit and affect my ability to maintain my clearance, and in turn affect my ability to provide for myself. You have to be very financially disciplined. You have to be an excellent planner, and you have to make some serious sacrifices to allow yourself to be able to afford your disability, and just try to hold out until you get to a point, to where I am now, 9 years later, that I can finally afford my disability and still be able to do things I want to do in life. I wish I had a better solution for you, because I'm still living this life and trying to figure this out on my own. But that's what I've learned in the last 9 years of being a person with a disability who has a job that pays them above the threshold to receive disability benefits.
To have in terms of those persons, especially given varying disciplines, you won't come out making what some people make. And
Right.
I'm still reflecting on the conversation that your physician had with you in this moment of trying to figure out a life career when you're already traumatized, and then trying to figure out how am I going to afford the care that it's going to take for me to just survive. And and what if um, those options that they gave you would not fit who you are as a person.
Right.
So that that gives us a lot to think about. And then I think the last thing that you spoke about, well, not the last thing, but the one of the last things that I want to bring up was when you talk about in the workplace that there are a lot of people with hidden disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those persons, they fly under the radar because unless they self-disclose. And it was so ironic on yesterday when we started the session off. We were having a panel discussion, and Dr. James Collins, who gave a presentation, was talking about 1 out of every 4 persons has a disability. And then I looked at the panel. In that particular case, it was 3 out of the 4 had a disability, and all 3 had what you would consider hidden disabilities. And so, what would be your advice to those who don't self-disclose, but they still have those needs for accommodations, but they're too afraid of how they would be treated in the workplace? What would be your advice to them?
My advice, because I understand that once you disclose or once you start talking about your disability, that people view you as someone who has a disability, who needs constant assistance, things of that nature. So I get why you don't want to disclose. However, in the grand scheme of things, if you disclose, you put more proof and evidence to the fact that more accommodations need to be made, and you put more to the case that the world in itself needs to be made more accessible. Here we are in quote unquote the most advanced technological era known to mankind, and yet much of the world is still inaccessible. If you decide to disclose, I would suggest continuing to still perform like you usually do, because it has to be normalized that people with disabilities, whether hidden or visible disabilities, can still perform the job it has, can still do the task. That would be my suggestion, and just whether it's going to take some level of getting comfortable with disclosing. Unfortunately, for those of us who don't have hidden disabilities, we're thrust into it. So we have no choice but to deal with it. And we could use your help in this fight for accommodations. So I pray that you do disclose, so companies can truly get an understanding of how many people they have working for them that have disabilities. And it would be more of a business case to make sure the workforce and facilities are as inclusive to people with disabilities as possible.
Thank you for that. So this concludes our session on this afternoon. Again, thank you, Tipper, for your insight into this wonderful topic. And for those that are watching us, Tipper has left his contact information on the slide. So if you feel inclined to reach out to him, I'm sure he would not mind if you would drop him a line or shoot him an email or hit him up on social media if you have additional questions. We are at the end of this session for this afternoon. Also, let's remember that we will have our ending at 4:00 p.m. and then we will meet tomorrow morning at the 9:30 a.m. hour. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to a great rest of the conference. Have a good rest of your day.